Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third part of a six-part mini-series. What we're doing is running through weapons. In the first part, what we did is we went through abilities. The second part, we went through all the Act 1 weapons across all four classes. We're making a slight change to this. What we're going to be doing now from this point forward is anything that's going from the Glittering Mines to the King's Maze, and from King's Maze to the ending of the game, we're actually going to split this up into the four different classes. The four different classes are awareness, talent, strength, and intel. In this episode, what we're going to start off with is awareness. Now, when we're looking at awareness weapons, we always need to go back to what are the 6 main abilities that we find are the most important. Now, I highly recommend that you guys go back to part 1 of this weapons series to get a full breakdown as to why these are the best abilities. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, there's always going to be different nuances when it comes to these abilities. In particular, awareness, you have to be a little bit more careful when we're talking about the heavy attack. Now, I'm not going to go into a full explanation as to why that's important in this discussion as we start talking about the weapons themselves and then comparing them to some of the other classes, you'll get a full understanding of what we mean. But mainly what we're looking for, of course, is rush, reset, heavy attack, speed down, splash, and focus restore. Now, when it comes to awareness weapons, let's talk specifically about those. What we're looking for is high damage weapons going into King's Maze and Vexor's Tower. We also are looking for the ability to be able to speed down and reset. When we're looking at awareness, though, there's not a lot of what I would say is timeline manipulation weapons out there. So what we need to do is look at a different tier of abilities within awareness. What we may be looking for is freeze, shock, or pierce. Now, as you can tell, if we're already deviating from our top 6, we're going to go into a further explanation as to why awareness may be not the best class of weapons out there for you to choose. And then what we're also going to look for is what the best value is for the cheapest cost. Now that we've all run through that, we're about to dive into the weapons themselves. Mike or Sheldon, do you guys have anything to talk about before we get started?
Well, I would say that awareness weapons, you're not, as you said, you're not going to find a lot of the higher end abilities like speed down or reset are very limited. There's not that many that have speed down and reset. There are no awareness weapons that have rush. So we're going to be looking for those other items like shock, freeze, pierce, and just overall raw power, mostly when we're looking at awareness weapons. Sheldon?
Yeah, awareness weapons, another thing unique about awareness weapons is pretty much every single one has more weapon bonuses than other weapons. Stuff like extra armor, evasion, resistance, damage against whatever on awareness weapons. That's probably why the weapon strength and skills are not super strong, is because the awareness weapons are more defensive weapons than offensive. And they don't truly excel either defensive or offensively. So this is why we think awareness weapons may not be the best choice, because you're kind of doing half and half. You're never truly reaching your peak in any one strategy when you're using awareness weapons, at least in our opinion.
Yeah, and that's something to really keep into consideration. So the one thing when we were talking about weapons going into the Glittering Mines, actually the awareness weapons were pretty decent when you get into the Glittering Mines compared to the other ones in terms of some power that you can get out of them. The one thing that you're going to start seeing is when we go through the weapons that are tier 2 weapons and tier 3 weapons going into King's Maze, there's going to start being a precipitous drop off. So let's first talk about the bows that you can see with awareness. So we've split these off into kind of 2 different categories. 1, the bow category, and 2, the spear category. And what we'll do is we'll kind of melt those all together at the very end, going into King's Maze, of what are those all those weapons combined, which ones are the best of the best. So starting off here, we have the longbow. The longbow does 14 damage and also has a heavy draw to it. The angler bow does 11 damage, and the best part about it is that it does piercing. And then what you have is an 11 damage composite bow that does some AoE, and then you've also got the bandit bow that does potential bleed if you hit it perfectly. I think it's pretty straightforward that the longbow, just because it does the most damage and also has a power-up attack damage, is why it's the best. But other than that, I don't know if there's much else to add on these particular weapons.
I was actually a little conflicted on whether I would actually put the angler bow ahead of the longbow, even though it's 3 damage less, because of the pierce. The heavy draw on the longbow, although we do value heavy attacks, it's one of the main attributes that we like in weapons. The bows often come with a heavy draw with a minus 30% accuracy penalty. And spending 2 focus can only negate 15% of that. So you're still going to be at a minus 15% to your awareness attribute when using a longbow's heavy draw, which makes it a little bit inferior to try to actually use that skill. Plus, it's a 5 check, so you often will miss heavy draws quite a bit unless you can get a called shot to go off on a hunter or you get a lucky crit. So sometimes I actually prefer the angler bow for consistent damage that can pierce. So that's just one thing I wanted to say about the other weapons. Composite bow, bandit bow, I don't particularly care for them.
Yeah, when it comes to pierce, which I believe a lot of awareness weapons do, for the most part, if you're running an awareness character with 2 magic characters, I don't value pierce as much, because it's very rare to come across a group of enemies in which they all have high armor, in which you'll need the pierce, so you can just simply focus down the enemies that don't have armor, while your other guys your magic attackers are killing the enemy that does have armor. So really, the only problem is if you're running an awareness and a strength character, then pierce is probably way better at that point. So I would say definitely angler bow if you're running a strength character as well. Otherwise, I still kind of like longbow. Longbow's heavy draw can act as a pierce, like I said before. Just going through the armor is pretty much the same thing as pierce, but it's very rare for you to use it on armor characters, because like I said, you need to run into a lot of enemy types that have high armor all at the same time, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, what we'll do here is, for some comparison sakes, we're also going to talk probably a little bit more about the heavy draw and what the difficulties are with these particular weapons compared to what like the strength weapons could be, and why we value the heavy attack so much more. But let's kind of move on from this point and kind of show you guys like a quick representation of what we could get in Act 1 compared to what these bows give you in Act 2. So what we had mentioned in the first, or I should say in the second video in the tier, in the Act 1 weapons, was that you could get Battle Staff, which is really something just as good, if not better, than all of these bows. It gives you some extra speed, even some extra armor as well too, and you can do stun and daze. So there's really no need to really switch out or even purchase these weapons. The Worn Trident is just as good as 3 and 4. So what you'll start seeing here is the Act 1 weapons are actually pretty good, and there's not much of an increase in going to these particular bows if you were able to get those in Act 1.
Yeah, the idea here is you're trying to find a weapon that's worth the value to purchase it. If the Worn Trident's the starting weapon from the Gladiator, and it can do pierce. It's nearly as good as the angler bow. So why spend the money on a weapon that can do the same thing with 1 more damage? It's like, I'd rather spend my money on something else. These bows generally just aren't worth it.
Yeah, awareness weapons in general don't scale very well as you increase through tiers of the game, making a tier 2 weapons almost just as good as tier 3 and tier 4s being almost just slightly better than tier 3 and etc. So most of the time, if you have an awareness weapon, it's hardly ever worth using your money to improve your weapon for usually 1 or 2 extra damage. There are certain weapons that are like really good that we'll get into later, but a lot of the weapons, it's kind of like a whatever. Like it's not gonna do anything. Not much of
Rather
not,
than,
not
yeah, rather than
yeah.
trying to purchase these weapons, I will actually try to upgrade a strength weapon or an intelligence weapon on a different character, and I'll just wait for the game to drop an angler bow or drop a longbow to me rather than trying to purchase it, because it's just not worth spending the money for that tiny little of an upgrade.
Mm-hmm. You guys are going to sense a theme about what we're going to say about awareness weapons as we keep going through this. We've already probably mentioned the same thing 2 or 3 times now. So let's keep moving on and kind of show you guys the rest of these weapons. So tier 2, there's pretty much one that stands out over the rest, and that's the Razor. If you do get your hands on the Razor, this is an incredibly good weapon. Now, of course, it's rare, so to get your hands on that particular one isn't necessarily that common. The Volge is definitely going to be something that we feel is the best. It has the ability to do splash, and it also has the ability to do a heavy thrust. The one thing that you do notice the difference between the heavy thrust with this particular weapon compared to what you get out of the bows is that it only reduces your accuracy by 15%. That's a big difference, especially when you're talking about you're probably only in the 70 range at this point, maybe high 70s. If you're running Hunter, you probably could be right at about 80. When you're talking about a 50% accuracy with a bow and talking about a 65% accuracy with the Volge, you're probably much better off having the Volge. So please do not grab the bow because you have called shot. You'd be much better off having this to give yourself more potential for more damage. Anything else you guys would like to add to that?
Yeah, these weapons do more damage than those bows that you saw earlier. 15 damage from the Volge, 14 damage from the Pitchfork. 14 was the max that you were able to get from the longbow. So these just do way more damage, and they're just better weapons altogether. The Razor is a lore store weapon that you had to unlock from your lore store. And because it is a lore store weapon, although it's rare, you can actually find it fairly easily as long as you're diligent about checking night markets during your game, if you have night markets unlocked as well, or even sold from goblin shops when you're in dungeons. So if you can get your hands on a Razor, the Razor's 20 damage, that's actually even more than the heavy thrust from the Volge. So that's probably the best weapon you can look for from anything that's available to you upon leaving the Glittering Mines and you're in the tier 2 time frame. Sheldon?
Another thing I want to mention, for those who are looking at the Razor right now, remember the 20 damage. As we go through the video, and once we get to tier 4, you'll notice that the damage that the weapons do in tier 4 are very minuscule compared to the Razor. The Razor can actually carry you throughout the game, along with a few others. That's just one thing I want to point out. That if you have Razor, you probably don't even need to purchase a tier 4 weapon, honestly.
There are games I've actually gone into the Vexor's Tower with a Razor.
You can win the game with Razor, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the scary thing. You can technically get in tier 2, and you can.
And that's not to say that the Razor's that great. It's just to tell you how bad most awareness weapons actually are.
Right. That's yeah.
Again, you said you can win with a Razor. You can also win with no weapon too. It's just it doesn't necessarily help you all that much. But again, we'll go through the rest of these weapons to kind of show the balance of what these are. And that's a great point of what Sheldon brought up is, of course, you get this Razor. It's a fantastic grab. So here's some special highlights that we have for you. The Twin Knives is a DLC. So again, console players, just like me, you have no access to this. But of course, these these speed weapons are fantastic. Not only the reason why we also put this in as a special highlight because you don't necessarily have to run this with your awareness hero, but as we talked about in part 2 is typically you do attach it to your fastest hero, which happens to be your awareness hero, typically your hunter. But the Twin Knives is of course fantastic because it does 15 damage. You also increase your speed and the crit chance is great. You can ignore armor with it. Reflect isn't really anything that you'd really worry about, but that's a great add. Druid bow. Now, this was actually something that I could not understand at all when I ended up having the Druid bow, and you have to test this out. You'll see that there's a 14 damage shot and a 14 damage shot. Now, I know I use this same wording, but shot and enchanted arrow. What's really unique with that is what it does is one of them does physical damage, the other one does magic damage. So what you do is you just switch back and forth depending on what you're facing. Facing an armor hero, use enchanted arrow. You're facing a resistance enemy, then you ended up you go ahead and using the shot for your physical damage. So it's like a super good pierce because you're just switching back and forth and you're just ignoring whatever it is that you're going up against.
Actually, more like a weak pierce, because if you have an enemy that has both physical armor and magic resist, then you have no way of piercing either one.
Okay, but
so it's more like a weak version of pierce.
Yeah, that's it. That's a fantastic point. I didn't really think about it that way. A lot of times, though, when they do have both, though, it's a little bit more balanced. It's not like you don't usually have a really, really high armor and you usually have a really, really high armor or a really, really high resistance, or you have kind of a medium of both, right? So at least it can go a little over the top of it. And then Balin's Embrace, it's not, of course, a speed weapon, but it's just very similar to the Twin Knives. It's just a little bit weaker. Good crit chance, high speed, and it also ignores armor as well, too. So it's actually a pretty good weapon for your awareness hero. Anything to add with these special highlights?
Yeah, those of you that do have the Lost Civilization DLC, the Twin Knives is common, very easy to find in markets, and it's a significant improvement over almost any other awareness weapon from the Tier 2 set. It has the ability to pierce. It gives you speed on top of the fact that it's checking speed, so it actually improves your accuracy by using it, and it gives you crit chance, which is something that you're definitely gonna want to try to stack up on as crit chance. So
another thing about
Twin
these
Knives
three
is really good.
Another thing about these three weapons is if you happen to get these through a drop, it's pretty much going to be an obvious equip immediately. You're hardly ever going to have a decision. It's not like you're going to get all three of these weapons at the same time, or even two of them. So because they're so rare to get, there's not much discussion on these weapons, because if you get it, you use it because it's just better. Yeah,
exactly right. Okay, so let's move on forward into the Tier 3 bows. Now, the one thing that we haven't explained here quite yet, Tier 2 and Tier 3, but you haven't even gotten to King's Maze. What we do is we break it down actually in two different ways. Tier 2 and Tier 3 has to do with the town refreshes. So what we mean by that is when you get through the first 15 rounds of after Glittering Mines, there's a town refresh that occurs, which means it updates all the towns, increases prices, all sorts of different things. And what it does is it'll also change the weapons that are within the stores that you can get. That's what Tier 3 is. Now, to understand how town refreshes occur and how you should actually work around those to actually win the game, what you guys should do is check out our podcast that ends up running through a full Masters run, so you guys can get a breakdown of how to actually beat the game all the way through. Give you guys a little bit of an opportunity to figure out how we are able to get through the game pretty easily from start to finish from Masters, but you can learn everything on Apprentice and Journeyman too to help you find a way to get through the Glittering Mines all the way to King's Maze. Now, with that out of the way, the Tier 3 bows. I never pronounce this right. Declan's bow? Hopefully.
I think so. That's how I would say it.
Yeah.
Declan's bow is by far and away the best bow you can get. Typically, if you get this, this is a huge grab. This weapon can take you really far into the game. You'll see that as we compare it to certain other weapons as well too. If you get this, you're set to go pretty much into the King's Maze. Then what you have is the Great Bow. It also has a heavy draw. Again, pay attention to the heavy draw. It gives you minus 30% accuracy. Again, the heavy draw is a lot more taxing on bows compared to other weapons. There's also another element to the Great Bow. You do have a single target reset. Reset is a very strong ability in the game. The Great Bow can be good in certain instances to be able to reset maybe a very slow, big pounding character that you're going up against. So Great Bow is also a very good bow to have to go into King's Maze. And kind of round this off, the curved bow, 15 damage. That's what you have. You're going to struggle. So even though it's number 3 on the list, it's not the greatest. Anything to add there, guys?
Yeah, so for those who remembered the weapons we just showed in tier 2, twin knives and razor, both just as good, if not better, than curved bow. And they're a tier lower. And this is a common theme as we go up the tiers. It's like you're either looking for these god awareness weapons like the razor, the Declan's bow, and others we'll mentioned, or you're stuck with these crappy ones and just like, oh well, guess I'm using this.
Yeah, the twin knives does just as much damage as the curved bow, along with the pierce. So it's like, and it's going to be improved accuracy because it gives you speed on top of everything else.
Right.
So it's way better than a curved bow. Great bow can be handy for the reset. Don't ignore that if you have a need to do reset or have a little bit of safety from that reset. And Declan's bow is only 2 more damage than the razor, but it does give you the option to freeze enemies, and it does have a heavy draw or a heavy ice attack. So it's got some utility on it that can be handy.
And it going back to you guys actually just mentioned about the twin knives, and the one thing that when I was running Hunter, when I was first playing the game, there was always something that was off in my head that I just couldn't figure out that seemed messed up. Let's go back to the battle staff. The battle staff you can actually have in Act 1 going into Glittering Mines. That thing does 13 damage.
Yep.
You could be getting close to King's Maze, still going, is this really all I have to choose from? Is the curved bow? This is my upgrade, is an extra 2 damage curved bow.
Exactly.
And it took me a bit to kind of realize this, that there's times like I was like, I'm going into King's Maze going, there's got to be something better than this. And you're just like, okay, well, I have a guy who just evades a bunch of attacks, but is literally non-existent in so many fights. This is why you'll see these rare weapons that we're highlighting, because unfortunately, you really kind of need these weapons to be very effective. Okay, so let's go on to the tier 3 spears. Spears are luckily higher damage, but you notice that when we're talking about tier 2, right? The tier 2 spears were definitely better than the bows. So again, for you Hunter players out there, do not be enamored by Called Shot. Make sure you get the best weapon that you can. You don't know when Called Shot's going to ring out anyways, and even then the extra damage it does is going to be insignificant because these weapons are going to do much better. Walder's Wrath. I'm going to hold this off and let Mike and Sheldon talk about this particular weapon. Go ahead. Just go ahead and start off with Walder's Wrath.
Sheldon, you go first on this one.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm just going to spill the beans right now. Walder's Wrath is one of the best weapons in the game, and you can get it this early. Like, you can do the demon caves with it, you can finish the final tower with it. Its power is quite high, and the thing that really makes it shine is actually the weapon bonus. The 50% damage against humanoids. We don't actually consider weapon bonuses very often at all when choosing a weapon. This is an exception. The 50% damage against humanoids makes this weapon a 33 damage weapon. There are actually tons of humanoid enemies in the game. So if you end up finding this weapon, I would purchase it without even thinking about it. This weapon is so powerful.
Yeah, now Walder's Wrath is also a lore store item unlock. And because it is a lore store item unlock, once again, you can find it in night markets and you can find it being sold by goblin shops. So I will always diligently look for either a razor or a Walder's Wrath if I'm running with a hunter, and I'm trying to find one of those 2 weapons in every game I'm running with a hunter. It has life drain on top of that, so not only are you doing good damage with it, but it's kind of giving you a little bit of passive healing at the same time. So it's a really, really good weapon for an awareness character like a hunter. The lance, it has a heavy thrust that does 24 damage if you can get it. That's only 2 damage more than what the Walder's Wrath would do against a non-humanoid.
Yep.
So it's a little bit better. And the harpoon's actually one I kind of do like if I'm not able to find Walder's Wrath. It does have the ability to pierce, and it can do additional damage against water type enemies, and it gets enemies wet with the regular attack. So anytime you're running up against an enemy that has must have a perfect roll to hit kind of thing on it, getting them wet can remove that and make it easier for your teammates to hit that enemy and finish off the kill. So these are probably the best you're going to get from tier 3, and Walder's Wrath is not only the best from tier 3, it's really close to being the best for anything you can get in awareness class weapons.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating about this. Again, going back to, I was just talking about the battle staff, right? 13 damage. Our 3 and 4 harpoon and war spear is a tier 3 weapon to get you into King's Maze. Literally does 2 damage more.
Now, more damage.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about, of course, the lance is definitely an upgrade. So we've kind of just like glanced over the lance a little bit. You may not get Walder's Wrath, but the lance is a pretty decent weapon. This is one of those that you do want to keep in the back of your mind if this is the only one that you're able to purchase or you're able to find. Definitely the lance is a good one to have. Unfortunately, hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully this isn't the one that you're running with, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so let's move on to the special highlights. You'll see a little bit of a theme here, just like we talked about with the twin knives, the twin daggers. Of course, this is an upgrade to that. 20 damage. This is really good. It's a really good weapon. Remember, we just talked a lot about Walder's Wrath. This does 20 damage itself. 10% crit chance is really, really good. Being able to ignore armor is really good. This is definitely a really, really good upgrade if you get your hands on it. Console players, you can't get it. So, spinner. Now, I have to admit, I've beaten this game, Masters, on all levels. I've never run into the spinner before. I didn't even know this one existed until you guys told me about it. So I guess if you could find this thing, it's a decent weapon. I've never seen it before. The Rusty Musket. This comes down to if you're really struggling to find anything. But again, we're not huge fans of guns. Think about it this way. You have something that does 18 damage. It could also do 18 damage the next turn. This thing can only do like 24 damage, and then if you miss that shot, you may have 2 rounds of no damage at all. You definitely want to be able to be really good with your focus to make sure you get your shot. But then, of course, your second shot's a reload. So overall, you're only doing 24 damage across 2 turns. Kind of more levels it off to probably like a 12 damage weapon. Not the best in the world, but it's just something that if you really have no weapons and you just ended up getting this dropped right when you somehow couldn't get anything else coming out of the glittering mines, this is something to think of. Anything to add with these weapons?
Yeah, the Rusty Musket, it's only on this slide just so that we didn't completely forget about the guns. It doesn't mean it's good. It just means it exists in the game. Same thing with Spinner. It exists in the game. It is extremely hard to find. I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't try to be looking for it. If it just drops to you, then you're just getting lucky. It has an overload attack that can do 54 damage, but it's at a minus 50% accuracy. You'd have to pretty much fully focus that attack to get that to go off. It is one-handed though, so it does allow you to use a shield. The real good one here is the twin daggers. It can do a pierce. It's doing 20 damage. It has a 10% crit chance. It's giving you speed, which is improving the accuracy on the weapon. That's actually really, really good, on par with the Walder's Wrath practically.
The thing that's nice about twin daggers and even twin knives is the built-in evade down into the basic attack is really good when fighting those nasty evasive enemies. It just strips that skill off of them and they cannot dodge again. That's also really nice.
That's a good point. I completely forgot about that. Thanks for highlighting that. Yeah,
the evade down is really, really handy.
Yeah. And it's a 2-check, so like you can easily just use one focus, especially when you have a hunter that's really fast to begin
really
with.
good weapon against like imps or thieves.
Yeah. All right. Now that we've kind of gone through the special highlights, we're going to kind of wrap this up in a bow in terms of doing King's Maze. We spent a lot of time Walder's Wrath. We believe that's the best. We had a little bit of a fun internal discussion about the difference between Walder's Wrath and Declan's Bow. I personally think Declan's Bow is a little bit better. I think I enjoy more of the freeze and aspect to it, so you can also get a better, higher damage for your other heroes as well too. But those guys made a really, really great point when it comes to the frequency of what you go against humanoids. Also something to keep in mind too when you go against chaos camps. They're humanoids. So be able to do that extra damage against those guys as well too. That's very helpful. So pretty much what you're looking for is if you get one of these 4 weapons, you pretty much lock it down, and this is what you want to go into with the King's Maze. Hopefully you're not anything short of this. But if you are, go ahead back through this video. If you don't end up getting one of these 4, maybe the Lance is the one that you get, and that's the best that you can get. It is what it is.
Awareness weapons is definitely the biggest hit or miss weapon type. If you don't get these weapons, then you're kind of partially struggling. If you get these weapons, then you're doing really well.
Okay.
Yeah, and Walder's Wrath and Razor, you have to unlock them from your lore store. So if you haven't even done that, they're not even available to you at all in your game.
Mm-hmm.
So I always unlock those. I tell people when they're first starting the game, spend your first few points of lore purchasing Walder's Wrath and Razor from your lore store.
So you're telling me when I told everyone to get the Herbalist first, that wasn't probably the best advice in the world?
We'll move on.
We'll just move on. All right, let's go into the tier 4 weapons. This is, of course, right after you get outside of King's Maze. These are the weapons that are available when you start moving over into the Parched Waste and the Dropstone Badlands before the 15 round refresh. We're going to go back into the bows. You got Dragon Bow. Again, what it is it has a heavy draw, but what you see there again with the heavy draw, it's minus 30% accuracy. But the really nice thing to go with this as well too is reset. So Dragon's Bow is really nice to be able to have that reset on top of also being able to do the heavy draw with its 23 damage. Silver Bow, it's a very unique type weapon. It ignores armor, and I don't think you need a perfect hit for it to ignore armor, if I'm not mistaken. Or
you do need a perfect.
You do need a perfect, but you don't get a increase reduction like you do with a lot of piercing weapons, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's built into the main attack, so there's no accuracy debuff.
Okay. As you can tell, I don't know if I've ever gotten Silver Bow, so that's why I'm asking the question there. And then Frostbow does 22 damage. You are able to do the heavy draw. The one nice thing is it's not as taxing. It's at minus 25% accuracy to be able to do that. So what's good is you're able to do that heavy draw while also having the potential for freeze, but it's hard to do a 5-check freeze there. We, of course, value the reset more. That's why we feel the Dragon Bow is better than the Frost Bow. And then you have the Assassin's Bow. The Assassin's Bow has some unique ability to it that it has a sure 100% shot, but it's only 10 damage. Probably when you're at this point, that's like pretty much shooting peas at somebody, so I don't think you're going to use that very often. Very rare case, so that's not that fantastic. But it also has a heavy draw as well too. That also has a minus 30% accuracy, and it's only on top of the 20 damage. Anything to add there with those particular bows?
Go ahead, Sheldon.
Not much. I just again want to state, I'm probably going to state this more times. These weapons hardly any different than the tier 3 weapons in the terms of damage. The weapons we're looking for King's Maze are doing more damage than these weapons, other than Dragon Bow. Dragon Bow does 1 more damage than Walder's Wrath and Declan's Bow, but even then, Walder's Wrath and Declan's Bow is still far superior than all 4 of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, keep in mind that when you're in tier 4, you're out of the King's Maze. there are only 4 towns in the game that are going to have these available for potential purchase. And those are the ones in the Badlands and in the Parched Wastes. So you have to travel from the King's Maze over to those biomes and find those towns and look for these kinds of weapons. If you've already got a Waldar's Wrath, these are not going to be much of an improvement. It's not worth spending your hard-earned dollars on these weapons if you already have a Waldar's Wrath.
Right.
Mhm. So, kind of moving on to the bows themselves. It looks like I should have actually numbered these 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I apologize for that. It's showing 1, 2, 3, and 4. What this is kind of a continuation of the bows themselves. Again, we're not going to spend a lot of time. We're just kind of showing these to you real quick, that these you have access to. But if you notice, if you're reaching for the lightning bow, the fire bow, you probably had something really weak going into King's Maze. So you're probably really struggling with your awareness hero at this point. But these are the weapons that you can choose that are accessible after the King's Maze. So let's not spend a lot of time on these kind of ancillary extra weapons. Let's move right into the tier 4 lances. Now, right off the top, you have the lightning lance. This is actually very specific to what you may want for the ending of the game. This lightning shock ability is something that you would need for Vexor's tower. So this is the reason why we have a 17 damage weapon up this high, is because of that. As we go through all the weapons, there's actually better shock weapons out there, but if you are to have something, this is something to have in your back pocket if you're unable to get a different shock weapon for Vexor's tower.
Yeah, if you don't mind my saying about the lightning lance, it's one of the better weapons for going into Vexor's tower from an awareness perspective. It has 25% additional damage against ice, so that helps you against the ice revenant in the Vexor's tower. It also has shock, so that you can shock those enemies, and it has a piercing shock with the lightning strike. So you're able to make sure that the damage is getting through. It's a one-handed weapon, so you can actually apply a shield and get yourself a little bit more buffs from that. Lightning or shocking also is very effective against the fire revenant. So for at least two of the revenants in the main tower, the lightning lance actually helps you in both those battles. So that's why it's ranked number 1 among the tier 4 weapons.
It also neuters the dogs that are adjacent to Vexor as well.
Yeah, so the Chaos Hounds, when you finally not the Chaos Hounds, but the hounds that are the partners to Vexor, they're not immune to being shocked, so this helps you against them as well, and it pierces their armor.
Yeah, so then if we go kind of down the list, Winter Spear, 22 damage, freeze type weapon. War Scythe, 24 physical damage, also can do a heavy thrust. Keep comparing this back to Waldar's Wraith, 22 damage weapon that does 50% actually damage against humanoids. Declan's Bow, 22 damage bow. I want to just kind of show you guys these weapons and kind of keep going through, because I don't think we need to just keep hammering the same point home. War Scythe, again, 24 damage. Nothing great. Bone Harpoon, 19 damage. Yes, it does some pierce. Gives you an ability to kind of go underneath the armor there. Let's just kind of keep pressing on through here. Fishing Trident, 20 damage. Doesn't really have any special abilities to go with it except for pierce. Silver Spear, 19 damage. Nothing really special to it except for some pierce. Jade Spear, 21 damage. Does some bleed. Nothing special there. I know I'm kind of moving through that quickly, but are we kind of proving the point here of what we're trying to tell you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if people are extra curious about certain weapons that we're glancing over, they're more than welcome to look it up on the wiki or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of these weapons are just too similar to each other that we don't particularly care.
Mm-hmm.
We'll definitely point out like the obvious ones that are really good, and we'll go into more detail on those. But
Mm-hmm.
any of these other ones, if you're really lacking an awareness weapon really badly, then yeah, buy any of these. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Like if you're still stuck at a tier 2 bow for some reason, get the crappy Jade Spear. It's better. Like
Put these in.
Yeah, at least these are one-handed, so you can apply
Yeah.
a shield.
right.
You can pretty much cut these out. Go ahead at home, cut these out on a piece of paper, put it in a hat, just swirl it around a little bit. Whatever one you pick out, that's the one that you should grab. That's pretty much what we're talking about. Now,
Yeah.
of course, we wanted to especially highlight the lightning one because being able to use it for the Ice Revenant, Fire Revenant, Vexor's dogs. That has some specific abilities to it. But other than that, just kind of all the same thing here.
Yeah.
Let's go into the bows. Now, the bows do have some unique abilities to them, which is kind of nice.
We're at tier 5 now. Yeah.
Yes, so we're into the tier 5 weapons. The Royal Bow. This does 25 damage. The really nice thing that this also has is target group speed down. This can be very handy if you need to slow down the enemies. Also, this has single target reset. So it has some of the top tier weapons. Now, of course, this speed down, though, does 0 damage. So this isn't like some of the other speed down weapons that we're going to tell you about that are really powerful. This one just does speed down, but you can do the reset. It also does 25 damage. Golden Bow, again, target group speed down, does 21 damage. What I would say is this is just the light version of the Royal Bow. You would rather have the Royal Bow over the Golden Bow. The one thing this does do, it does ignore armor. So that's the one kind of bonus to it. It can go straight through heavy armor heroes or enemies. Then you got the Obsidian Bow, 22 damage. The only thing is that it doesn't really give you either speed down or reset. This one just kind of does 22 damage with some bleed. Bleed we don't find is all that important. And target self-restore focus, even though we like restore focus, we don't really care to restore the focus of the awareness hero. We'd much rather restore focus of another hero, so that's why this weapon's not all that great. Anything to add with these bows?
You know, I want to say the Royal Bow, the speed down, the group speed down, and the single target reset, we do like those abilities. What's really funny, though, is you have to wait until 15 rounds after you've left the King's Maze to finally get your hands on those abilities from that Royal Bow. I had those abilities way back in tier 3 on the talent weapons. Arch Loot, Thuribow, Fancy Thuribow. I had all those built into those long ago from the talent side. When we'll get into the talent podcast later on, but wow, to wait this long just to get those abilities, sad. So
One
sad.
thing that is nice about Royal Bow, it does turn your awareness character basically like a talent character because it basically has the same support skills that the talent character does, but it also comes with really good damage. It's like good damage with good support. That's actually not bad. That's definitely a weapon I would purchase over anything else you have. That might be a weapon that you may actually want to purchase over something like Walder's Wrath or Declan's Bow if you actually feel like you need a support character and you're deciding to have your awareness character be that support character. I would go ahead and buy Royal Bow in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Group speed down and single target reset are very handy for the demon caves. Slow them down, get some dead, keep the slowest one for last, single target reset it when you get it down to the last one. That will really help you in demon caves.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Okay, then kind of moving on to the spears. We also have a gun in here as well too. So these are for the tier 5 spears. You have the Royal Lance. The Royal Lance does 28 damage. It also does have a heavy thrust. Again, the big difference between the bows and this heavy thrust is that it's a 15% accuracy reduction, not a 30% accuracy reduction. So we definitely value the heavy swing on these weapons much more than the bows. Gilded Trident. Gilded Trident, also same thing, has a heavy thrust type weapon. The splashes on these weapons aren't all that great because there's a massive reduction in terms of the actual main hit that it does. It actually goes all the way down to 14, which is really low, and it only has 7 splash. With a 5 check, you're not really going to do a lot of damage with that splash weapon. The musket, again, it's at 38. You look at it equivalently to maybe a 1920 damage weapon, but the one thing that this does have that's a little bit different than some of the other muskets is the headshot. So the headshot is a heavy 57 maximum damage shot. This is one of the rare guns that we do recommend because it does have the ability to do that really heavy high-end thrust shot.
I just wanted to point out here that the Royal Lance, the Gilded Trident, and the musket are pretty much the closest thing to what our strength characters are doing. Once we talk about that, strength characters for the most part are just trying to do as much damage as possible. Those 3 weapons is pretty much turning your awareness to a weaker version strength character who is just doing damage. It's one thing I wanted to just mention real quick about that.
And then the golden spear, of course, does 22 damage for number 4. So what else? What did you want to say there, Mike?
Well, golden spear is 22 damage. Walder's Wrath, 22 damage. The only thing you're gaining from the golden spear compared to the Walder's Wrath is the ability to pierce.
You also gain access to a shield if you happen to have one of the
it's-
really good shields that we mentioned before.
It's one-handed, so you can put a shield on. It's got a 10% crit chant bonus. But keep in mind, though, that the Walder's Wrath has 50% additional damage against humanoids. When you look at the Royal Lance and you look at the heavy thrust can do 35 maximum damage. That's really pretty close to the 33 damage that you could get out of a Walder's Wrath against a humanoid. Right about that level. So you could potentially pick these up if you have the extra money for them, but this is towards the end of the game, so these weapons are going to start to become fairly expensive. This is the final tier after the 15 rounds has expired after leaving the King's Maze. So these weapons are not going to be cheap. So do you really want to spend 400, 500 of your gold on one of these weapons, or is Walder's Wrath good enough to go into the tower with? So you'll have to make that judgment for yourself.
Okay, so now we're just going to kind of round out the rest of the spear weapons. Fire Scythe and Obsidian Spear. Again, kind of all doing the same type of damage, all doing the same type of abilities. Splash with some heavy, and then Obsidian Spear, single-handed weapon, which you guys just talked about with the previous single-handed weapon. Again, does 23 damage, but doesn't do any piercing. Nothing really special with that one. So if we kind of move on to the best of the best, going into Act 3, is what we see here is, or I'm sorry, yes, in Act 3 going into Vexor's Tower, is that we have the Royal Bow, because of the ability to be able to do the speed down and the reset. We do really value those abilities quite a bit. The Golden Bow, the Royal Lance, and of course the Lightning Lance, but the Lightning Lance is one of those that you do want to just kind of keep a hold of if you're able to get it, if you're unable to get another lightning weapon from one of your other classes. Anything to particular mention about the best of the best for Vexor, or for this Vexor's Tower?
Not for this slide. No, it's the next slide I have something to say.
Okay, so what we wanted to show you guys here is those are the best of the best for Act 5.
Tier 5.
But
yeah, the best of the best for all awareness weapons, period.
Walder's Wrath
Yeah.
and Twin Daggers. Why do you guys feel that this is the case?
Well, these are good enough. You know, if you're talking about a 25 damage Royal Bow and a 22 damage, potentially 33 damage against humanoids, Walder's Wrath, it's good enough. The Twin Daggers, 20 damage with additional crit chance and the ability to pierce, that's doing more damage than the Lightning Lance. It's good enough. And it's cheap. Probably easier to find. So just keep in mind that as they increase each tier, the amount of improvement over each tier is so minuscule, it's barely worth spending the money.
Yeah, if you have tons of extra money, then yeah, go ahead and purchase any of the tier 5 weapons that are listed below or behind these 2 weapons. Because Waller's Wrath, the weakest part of the game for Waller's Wrath is actually the tower. And there's only 2 fights it's good for. It's good against the Chaos Camp enemies during the first floor and Vexor himself. Against the Revenants, though, Waller's Wrath kind of is very lackluster. Pierce or utility skills are better for those Revenants. That's where Waller's Wrath kind of is lacking, is the Revenant fights. So if you have extra money, go ahead and buy any of the tier 5 weapons that we've listed. But if you're lacking money, Waller's Wrath is still strong enough where it's not completely useless against Revenants.
So this kind of rounds out the whole awareness problem we feel, is that when you're looking at damage, which we talked a lot about damage throughout this, is that when we start going through the strength weapons, they're not even comparable. It's just your strength hero ends up just blowing right past the awareness hero. So then you sit there and go, okay, the abilities. All right, we talked a little bit about single reset. We talked speed down, but with no damage, and being able to do a group speed down. Speed down's fine, but with no damage. You have to make sure you get a perfect roll to be able to do it. It doesn't really happen too often. So then we started talking about freeze, which is kind of like an okay ability. We talk about pierce, okay ability, nothing wrong with those. So what ends up happening is you get strength weapons or better DPS weapons. So then awareness doesn't beat that. And then talent and intel have better ability.
Utility. Yeah.
Utility that then the awareness heroes don't go. So what happens is when you get out of the glittering mines, you have this kind of hero that's kind of almost selfish. All he does is he avoids getting hit, so he doesn't get hurt maybe a lot, but then he doesn't really contribute much to the team fight. And that's what's so big of a change in terms of what we felt the meta was, is that this guy was just kind of living, but wasn't really contributing. And why there's been a shift away from the awareness hero, and why we felt that this was definitely the weakest class of weapons. And as we go through the next 3, you definitely will see a big differential between what the top tier of those weapons and what it brings to the team. That's what you'll see in the next few videos.
Before me and Mike met Daddio, we also thought this, where me and Mike would prefer intelligence, strength, and talent as our primary lineup. We didn't really care about awareness because awareness doesn't really help you. He's very selfish, like Daddio was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So thank you guys so much for joining us to talk about the awareness weapons. Our next dive into is going to be the talent hero. Again, if you guys want to reach us to talk a little bit more, feel free to reach us on Discord or go ahead and join mine or Sheldon's stream. We really do appreciate your time. And again, we look forward to seeing you guys again. Take care.